Hi guys, have you ever wondered how the poorest people in medieval Europe managed to survive when famine, harsh winters, and greedy lords surrounded them on all sides? Imagine living in a world without machines, fertilizers, or even proper tools, yet somehow coaxing life out of the soil so rich and green it could feed your family all year. Tonight we're going back to the dirt under their fingernails, the secret rhythms of the land, and the little miracles they whispered about under the moonlight. So, take a deep breath, settle in, and dim the light. Let the smell of earth and rain drift into your imagination. The story begins in the year 1324, in a small hamlet tucked behind a mist-covered forest in northern England. Dawn rises pale and cold, dew clinging to the thatched roofs and the rough tunics of peasants, already stooping in their gardens. The air hums with the sound of roosters and the distant tolling of a chapel bell. Among these peasants is a woman named Alda, known in the village as the Leaf Whisperer. She is no witch, though many mutter it behind her back. She simply listens to soil, to insects, to wind. Her little patch of land feeds not only her family, but half the hamlet during hungry months. Her garden is a patchwork of color, cabbages glistening with dew, beans twining around rough poles, onions sweetening the air. Children pause to stare as Alda kneels beside a row of leeks and murmurs something softly in old rhyme her grandmother taught her. Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil, till work is done. She swears the plants grow straighter when she does it. Across the lane, her neighbor Tomas, a stooped man with hands like cracked leather, watches her ritual with a mix of awe and suspicion. "You talk to dirt again, Alda," he calls, half joking. She smiles, not looking up. Dirt talks back, if you listen long enough. Tomas laughs, but later, when his own cabbages fail to sprout, he'll recall her words and wonder. In medieval villages like this, every square of land was precious. The Lord claimed the fields, the church took its tithes, and the peasants were left with whatever scraps they could carve from the edges. These tiny gardens, known as crofts, were lifelines filled with herbs, vegetables, and sometimes even medicinal plants traded in secret markets. Alda estrix were passed down through generations, soaking seeds in warm ale before planting so they de-sprout faster, mixing crushed nettles into compost to ward off worms, scattering ash from the hearth to sweeten the soil after rain. Her most guarded secret, though, was the moon method. She believed that every phase of the moon pulled not only the tides but the sap in plants. During waxing moons, she planted leafy crops, during waning roots, and somehow her harvests always came richer than anyone else's. One evening, after a day's labor, the villagers gathered at the edge of the field where Alda's beans climbed higher than a man's shoulder. They begged her to teach them. She hesitated. Knowledge was power, and power was dangerous for a peasant woman. But she saw their hollow cheeks and the way the children gnawed on bark during lean months. So she agreed to show them, under one condition: you must promise to treat the soil kindly. It's alive, same as we are. By torchlight, she demonstrated how to layer compost from pig manure, straw, and leftover ale yeast, how to bury crushed bones near carrots for strength, how to sprinkle rosemary water to keep pests away. Gardening, she said, isn't just growing food, it's bargaining with the earth. Word spread fast. By midsummer, the Lord's steward heard of a woman whose cabbages grew the size of helmets. He arrived one morning on horseback, demanding to see her garden. Alda bowed low but said little. The steward poked at the soil with his boot. "Magic," he sneered. "Hard work," she replied. Yet later that night, as she watered her plants, she whispered a charm: "Keep their eyes blind and their greed asleep." That year, famine struck nearby villages, but not theirs. The people credited Alda's green magic. They brought her gifts: wool, bread, even a broken copper coin polished like a treasure. She accepted none of it. "Just plant another row," she said, "and share what grows." Her humble garden became the village's beating heart. Still, peace never lasted long in those times. The church frowned on anything that smelled of old pagan ways. A traveling friar arrived one autumn, preaching that only prayer could make crops grow. He saw Alda's thriving garden and declared it unnatural. "Witchcraft hides in the hedges," he cried. Fear crept through the village like frost. Alda stayed silent, tending her beans as leaves withered under cold breath of rumor. Then winter came, fierce and hungry. Snow buried the fields, and even Tomas's well-kept stores ran low. One by one, villagers came to Alda's door, ashamed but desperate. She gave them dried herbs for soup, pickled onions, barley loaves she'd hidden under straw. "The earth gives if you remember her in the cold," she whispered. When spring returned, Tomas gathered the villagers and defended her before the friar. "If this be witchcraft, then may every witch feed the poor." The friar left in silence, but Alda's legend rooted deeper. Her story spread beyond their hamlet. Travelers carried her gardening songs to distant manors. Some said noble ladies began humming her planting rhymes in secret gardens behind stone walls. Even monks copied her soil mixtures into herbarium scrolls, disguising her name as Ald, perhaps meaning Alma Terra, the kind earth. By 1330, plague and famine raged across Europe. Villages vanished, but the ones that remembered Alda's ways endured a little longer. Her tricks were really simple science, born of patience: crop rotation before anyone called it that, composting, and the observation of insects as allies rather than pests. Bees, she taught, were the earth's little priests, and disturbing their hives was a sin. One afternoon, while teaching children to plant peas in neat rows, Alda told them, "The secret of growing isn't in your hands, it's in your heart. If you plant with fear, you reap hunger. If you plant with hope, the earth feels it." Generations later, chroniclers would find fragments of her words in faded parchment, mixed with prayers and superstitions. But to the peasants who lived them, they were truth. The garden was church, altar, and sanctuary, all at once. On a warm May evening, Alda sat outside her cottage, watching fireflies blink among bean leaves. She was old now, her hands gnarled as roots, yet her eyes still bright. Tomas approached, carrying a jug of ale brewed from her own barley. They drank in silence as the moon rose full and yellow. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" he asked. Alda smiled faintly. "They'll remember the taste of good bread, the smell of thyme in summer. That's enough." Years passed, seasons turned, and the hamlet changed. But long after Alda's cottage fell to dust, villagers still planted by the moon, still whispered to the soil, still thanked the earth before the first harvest. And every time a garden thrived in poor ground, someone would murmur Alda's blessing, even centuries later. When historians studied medieval agriculture, they puzzled over why some regions produced more food despite poor weather. They found notes of women's lore written in margins: recipes for compost, timings for sowing, herbs for soil. None bore Alda's full name, yet her spirit lived on in every humble garden where hands met earth with care. If you walk through an English countryside today and see a small walled garden blooming behind an old stone cottage, look closely. Somewhere among the parsley and beans, a handful of soil still remembers her touch. And perhaps, if you listen at dusk, you'll hear the faint echo of a voice saying, "Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil till work is done." Spring rolled into summer, and the gardens of the hamlet grew heavy with life. The scent of marjoram and thyme drifted on the wind. Bees hummed among the clover, and the villagers moved slower now, their hunger eased by the work of their own hands. Alda's teachings had become habit. Children knew to scatter ashes after rain. Women stirred compost as if mixing dough, and even Tomas, who once mocked her murmurs, now paused to whisper a small thank you before pulling a carrot from the soil. The rhythm of the land had taken root in them, yet peace was fragile. A new lord had arrived from the south, sent to oversee the region after his cousin's death. His name was Sir Reynold, young Sharbide, with a hunger for coin masked by silk manners. He rode through the hamlet one morning, his cloak bright against the drab cottages, and noticed the abundance of green. "How curious," he said, "that peasants here grow gardens richer than my own kitchen." He smiled, but his steward marked each plot on a scroll. Soon taxes would rise, for the Lord believed any soil that bore fruit owed him more than tithes. When the steward returned weeks later, demanding payment in produce, the villagers panicked. Their gardens had been built to feed mouths, not to fill wagons. Alda, though old and tired, gathered them beneath the oak by the well. "They can take what grows above," she said, "but not what sleeps below. Let your roots be your secret." That night, under moonlight, men and women worked in silence, burying stores of turnips, onions, and beets deep beneath the loose beds. They left only a few withered plants to fool the steward's eye. When he came to collect, the gardens seemed struck by blight. "Your tricks have failed you, old woman," he mocked Alda. She bowed her head humbly, hiding a smile. After he left, the villagers unearthed their hidden food and shared it out. That winter, no one starved. Word of their defiance spread, but so did misfortune. Drought followed the next spring. Rivers shrank, wells ran dry, and the soil turned to dust that clung to skin and throat. The Lord's fields withered, yet the peasants' gardens survived, small green pockets amid brown despair. Their secret was a trick Alda had whispered before the rains stopped. Dig deep ditches around each plot, line them with moss and straw, and cover them with flat stones. The trapped moisture kept roots alive when the sky forgot them. Sir Reynold noticed and sent his men to learn the method. They returned with broken stones and muddied hands, unable to copy the art. "They hide something," he hissed. "Find the source." He ordered Alda brought before him. She came quietly, leaning on her stick, her gray hair bound with twine. "You have power over the earth," he said. "Teach me or be punished." She looked at him for a long time and said softly, "The earth obeys none but those who serve it." He struck her across the face. That night, as she lay in her cottage, nursing the bruise, Tomas came to her door. "You must flee," he urged. "He will hang you by morning." But Alda only smiled faintly. "No man owns the seasons, Tomas. If I die, the seeds will remember." Before dawn, she vanished into the woods. Some said she went to join a band of healers. Others whispered she melted into the earth itself. Her cottage stood empty, yet her garden bloomed on without her. Years passed. Children grew into farmers, and Alda's name faded into a legend spoken by candlelight. The hamlet prospered quietly, though no one claimed to know why. They planted by moon and buried water jars beneath the soil, saying only, "It's how it's always been done." One midsummer, a young woman named Breda, granddaughter of Tomasfawun, a small bundle of parchment hidden under a loose floorboard in Alda's old hut. The pages were covered with drawings of roots, leaves, and curious symbols shaped like moons and stars. At the bottom, in shaky ink, was a line: "To speak with the earth, first learn her language." Breda could barely read, yet she traced the shapes with her fingers and began experimenting. She noticed that when nettles grew tall beside beans, the beans thrived. When onions stood near cabbages, the cabbages stayed free of worms. She called it plant friendship. Soon her garden became as famed as Alda's once had been. Villagers came for advice, and she shared freely, saying, "The earth remembers kindness." But Sir Reynold's son now ruled, crueler than his father. He saw the hamlet's bounty and demanded tribute again, threatening to seize their gardens for his own men. When his soldiers came, Breda met them at the gate with calm eyes. "Take what you wish," she said, and they tore up her herbs and trampled her beds. Yet by autumn her garden had returned, greener, stronger, as if the earth itself defied command. In secret, Breda taught children Alda's chants, turning them into songs so they would not be forgotten. "Under the ground, the roots are holding hands," she told them, "and even lords can't cut what they can't see." The songs spread like wind across villages. Travelers carried them far, and soon peasants everywhere sang to their gardens at dusk. The melodies changed from place to place, but the rhythm remained, the rhythm of work, hope, and quiet rebellion. By 1350, plague swept through the land. The great manors fell silent, their masters dead, while the little hamlet endured. The peasants credited the herbs garlic, sage, and rosemary that Alda once planted for health. When healers asked how they knew to use them, Breda only said, "The garden teaches." One autumn night, Breda dreamed of Alda standing among moonlit beans. The old woman whispered, "Guard the seeds." When Breda woke, she gathered the best of every crop, beans, barley, onions, herbs, and sealed them in clay pots buried beneath the oak. The next year, floods came, washing away fields, but the hamlet's seeds endured underground. Life sprouted again from patience. Generations shifted like seasons. The hamlet became a village. The cottages turned to timbered houses. Yet people still tended gardens in the same old pattern, by moon, by friendship of plants, by care rather than command. They called it the old way. Scholars in later centuries would rediscover these same methods and call them crop rotation, permaculture, and companion planting. But to the descendants of Alda and Breda, it was simply remembering. Centuries later, when travelers passed through that region, they noticed how every small garden bloomed earlier than expected, how herbs flourished beside vegetables in harmonious confusion. Locals told them, half smiling, "It's Alda's blessing and Breda's keeping." The legend deepened. Some said that in spring, if you knelt beside the oldest oak and pressed your ear to the ground, you could hear a heartbeat not of any creature, but of the soil itself, slow and steady. And if you whispered thanks, the wind would stir the leaves in reply. In quiet nights, when the moon hung full, women still placed bowls of water on their windowsills to catch the moonlight for the seeds. Men sharpened hoes while humming the old tunes. Children gathered worms after rain, calling them Earth's little soldiers. Life went on, wrapped in the rhythm of the garden. By the time travelers wrote of this place in dusty chronicles, they spoke of a village where famine never lingered long, where even during wars the gardens remained untouched. They noted the strange customs, the chanting, the moon planting, the secret of buried water, and wondered if some forgotten druidic wisdom had survived. But the villagers only smiled and said, "We just listened to the soil." As centuries passed, new lords came and went. Stone manors rose, fell to ruin, and were rebuilt. The hamlet became a market town, its name altered on maps. Yet in every courtyard and behind every inn, a patch of green persisted. Even when iron tools replaced wooden ones and parchment turned to printed books, people still knelt to plant with bare hands, murmuring the same old words: turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil till work is done. And somewhere in that endless cycle, seed to sprout, sprout to harvest, harvest to seed, again the spirit of Alda and Breda lived quietly, like a memory of rain beneath the ground. The years turned quietly, as they always did in the village born of Alda's wisdom. The soil never hurried, the people never forgot. Time moved like roots, slow, unseen, patient. Yet beyond their hedgerows, the world was changing. The black-robed priests had grown powerful again. Kings fought over distant crowns, and traders brought whispers of strange crops from lands far away. One early spring morning, a merchant's wagon rattled down the muddy road, its wheels caked with the dust of many kingdoms. In the back lay sacks of grain, the color of gold, and small jars filled with seeds that shimmered like polished stones. The merchant stopped in the village square, his voice ringing above the bleating of goats. "New wonders from beyond the sea," he cried. "Seeds that ripen twice as fast, grain that never withers, herbs that heal fever with one leaf." The villagers stared in awe, but Breda's grandson, a quiet man named Yuan, kept his distance. He was the new gardener of Alda's patch, and though young, he bore the patience of the old ways. That night, as torches flickered against the cottage walls, Yuan sat at his table and examined one of the merchant's seeds. It gleamed unnaturally smooth, heavy for its size. He pressed it between his fingers. It did not crush. "The soil will not know this," he murmured. Still, curiosity was a stubborn weed. He planted one behind his hut, deep under the moon's soft gaze. Weeks passed. The seed sprouted tall and thick, its leaves glossy as metal. The other plants seemed uneasy around it, curling away. One morning, Yuan found that the strange plant had strangled the peas beside it. When he tore it out, the roots bled a dark sap that stained his hands. He burned it that night, and as the flames rose, the wind seemed to sigh in relief. The merchant left soon after, chased by rumors that his seeds cursed the ground. The villagers, wary but grateful, returned to their old methods, whispering blessings over their gardens. Yet Yuan could not shake the thought that the world beyond the hills was changing faster than the soil could keep pace. He began keeping records, weather, moon phases, yields, writing them carefully on scraps of parchment he traded from monks. "So memory won't die when voices do," he said. By the time Yuan's beard turned gray, his journals filled a chest. He had discovered things Alda never wrote: how certain herbs revived tired soil, how ash from burned apple would give sweetness to roots, how planting beans after barley returned strength to the ground. His neighbors thought him eccentric, but they came quietly when their gardens failed. Yuan never refused. "The soil teaches all," he'd tell them, "if you give her time to speak." Then came the war. Armies marched across England, burning fields, conscripting men. The village, too small to matter, escaped battle, but not fear. When soldiers demanded food, the villagers hid their stores, as Alda once had. The gardens, modest and scattered, became their shield. Under the cover of hedges, they planted fast-growing crops, radishes, lettuces, onions, things that could be pulled before soldiers noticed. Ewan's granddaughter, Mara, was only 14 when she learned to trick the eyes of hunger. She painted dying leaves on the edges of her garden so it looked blighted, yet beneath the dirt her carrots thrived. She learned to dry herbs in clay ovens to preserve their strength through winter, to mix chamomile with garlic for coughs, and to trade mint sprigs for bits of cloth with passing travelers. When the war ended, famine followed, but her cottage always smelled of stew. One evening, as the sun sank behind the oak and the world glowed amber, Mara found herself kneeling beside the same patch where Alda once whispered to the soil. She had read Ewan's journals, copied his notes, and added her own drawings of roots and worms. But now she noticed something odd. The ground where the oak's roots spread was warm even at dusk. She pressed her hand into it, felt the pulse of life. "Are you still here?" she asked softly, half smiling. The wind stirred her hair, and she thought she heard a faint hum like the soil sighing in contentment. Seasons turned. The village grew into a town, its old cobbles lined with inns and markets. Strangers came, bringing tools of iron, barrels of salt, books of learning. Among them arrived a friar with bright eyes and ink-stained fingers, named Brother Oswin. He spoke kindly, loved plants, and carried a bundle of scrolls about herbs and healing. When he heard of Mara's gardens, he came to see them. Together, they walked between rows of beans and onions, and he marveled. "You grow as if guided by grace," he said. She smiled. "By soil, brother, not grace." He laughed, but later he asked her to share her knowledge for his monastery's herbarium. She hesitated, fearing the church would twist her teachings into rules. "The earth doesn't obey scripture," she said. "She obeys kindness." Still, she allowed him to copy some of her notes, on one condition, that her name never appear. "Let it stay in the soil," she said. And so it did. Years later, long after Mara's death, Brother Oswin's manuscripts spread through abbeys across the realm. Scholars studied them, amazed by their insight into soil care, plant pairings, and lunar cycles. They called the author Magistra Terra, the teacher of the earth. They never knew she was a peasant girl who learned by touching dirt. But even knowledge, like soil, can be stolen. When the monasteries fell and the king's men seized their books, many were burned or lost. Yet one scroll survived, hidden by a young novice who fled into the countryside. His name was Leofric, and he carried the scroll in a leather pouch for years. When hunger forced him to settle, he became a gardener for a small manor not far from the old village. There, he copied the teachings into a new notebook, adding his own thoughts. "A seed is memory," he wrote. "Plant it, and time itself remembers." Leofric's garden flourished. Nobles came to taste his herbs and marvel at his roses blooming out of season. He told them it was prayer, but when he was alone, he murmured the old rhyme: "Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil till work is done." When he died, his notebook passed to the manor's cook, who used it not for philosophy but for flavor. She found that parsley grew sweeter near beets, that thyme kept meat fresh when stored with salt. She left it to her daughter, who sold herbs at the market, who then passed it to her son, a mason, who used crushed mint to soothe his hands after long days shaping stone. The knowledge traveled quietly, changing form, but never dying. Centuries moved like seasons, unnoticed, until they'd gone. The village became part of a great estate, the oak still standing, older than any house. The peasants were no longer peasants, but tenants, still tending little gardens behind their cottages. They no longer knew Aelda's name or Brida's songs, yet at dusk they still turned the soil with bare fingers, whispering half-remembered blessings. The rhythm survived, even when memory didn't. One spring morning, a scholar from the city arrived, a woman named Isolde Fenn, carrying notebooks and a curiosity that burned brighter than any candle. She had heard rumors of a valley where gardens seemed to thrive without fertilizers or tools, where vegetables grew sweeter than anywhere else. She walked through the old market road, now half forgotten, and reached the place where Aldous Oak still spread its vast green arms. The people there were polite but puzzled. "We don't do anything special," they said. "Just plant like our mothers did." Isolde knelt to study the soil, dark, rich breathing. She asked about the planting patterns and noticed how cabbages and onions shared space, how herbs guarded the edges, how paths curved instead of straight lines. "It's designed by instinct," she whispered, "or memory." That night she camped beneath the oak. The wind hummed softly through the branches, and she dreamt of women Nalda, Brida, Maribent, over their gardens, hands deep in earth, faces lit by moonlight. When she woke, she began writing. She called her notes the memory of soil in them. She described how generations of unnamed peasants had preserved a system of ecological balance through observation and care. "They spoke to the ground," she wrote, "and it answered." Her work would later inspire others to study ancient farming, to revive lost methods. But in the village itself, nothing changed. The gardens remained humble, the people content. Each new child learned where to dig and when to sow, not from books, but from the rhythm of daily life. One summer, as Isolde prepared to leave, a storm rolled through the valley. Lightning struck the oak, splitting it down the center. The villagers mourned as if they'd lost an ancestor. When dawn came, they found the trunk still standing, hollow but alive. Inside, at the base where roots tangled, something glimmered, a clay pot sealed with wax. Inside were seeds, dry yet whole, and a scrap of parchment faded with age. Only 3 words were legible: "Guard the roots." Isolde wept quietly. She left the seeds with the villagers, who planted them in a ring around the oak's scarred trunk. By next spring, new shoots had risen, beans, herbs, barley, and the air smelled of renewal. The people said it was the old blessing returning. Years later, when Isolde's book was published, readers marveled at her discovery of a continuous gardening tradition stretching back 600 years. They called it miraculous, mystical, proto-scientific, but the villagers knew better. To them, it was simply life. They laughed softly at scholars who measured soil while forgetting to touch it. "You can't write love into dirt," an old farmer said. "You can only live it." And so, while cities built machines to farm and factories rose in smoke, the little valley continued its quiet pact with the earth. Seasons came, seasons went. The moon still guided the planting. The ash still sweetened the soil. Children still sang when scattering seeds. And in the hush between day and night, if you pressed your ear to the ground, you might still hear it, the hum of centuries, the whisper of hands and roots and rain, all speaking one language: "Thank you." And under that whisper, deeper still, the old words echoed, as they always had: turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil, till work is done. Autumn settled over the valley like an old quilt stitched with mist and gold. The harvest wagons groaned beneath their weight, and the villagers stacked sheaves of barley beneath the half-hollow oak that still watched them all. The air smelled of damp soil and apples. Somewhere a child laughed as she chased a chicken through fallen leaves, and the laughter melted into the rustling wind, the same wind that had once whispered to Alda, Breda, Mara, and Ewan. Time had blurred their names, but not their rhythm. In one of the cottages, a young man named Rowan bent over a clay pot, examining the dark crumbs within. He was the great-great-grandson of the families who had tended this land since before the king's first coin was minted. His hands were stained with the same soil, his hair glimmered with the same dust. Yet Rowan lived in a world beginning to forget. Iron plows and distant markets were reshaping the countryside. Men talked of profit more than patience. The manor's new steward had ordered the peasants to replace their old gardens with neat rows of uniform crop turnips, barley, flax for efficient counting and taxation. No more mixing herbs with beans, the steward said. No more childish songs. Rowan obeyed in daylight, but worked differently at dusk. Beneath the willow by the stream, he kept a secret pacha confusion of mint and peas, onions curling around sage, marigolds bright as fire. Each evening he'd crouch there, listening to the hum of gnats and the creak of frogs. The garden felt alive, not tidy, but kind. It reminded him of the stories his grandmother whispered before sleep, how the soil remembered, how every seed carried a ghost. One night, while watering the patch, he noticed faint lights moving among the leaves, not fireflies, but a softer, pulsing glow, like breath. He rubbed his eyes, yet the glow remained, outlining the edges of plants. The air smelled faintly of honey and wet stone. He reached out, and for a heartbeat, the warmth beneath his palm felt like another pulse, slow and steady. "Are you her?" he whispered, though he didn't know which her he meant. The light dimmed, as if nodding. Then the night folded back into ordinary darkness. The next morning, he found the plants twice their size. Word spread quickly. Neighbors came to ask his secret. Rowan only smiled. "Maybe the earth just likes to be listened to," he said, but rumors carried far too far. By winter, a magistrate from the city arrived, claiming Rowan used forbidden charms. "We heard of lights, of unnatural growth," he accused. "Such things must be taxed or banned," Rowan protested, showing only his muddy hands and cracked nails. "My only magic is patience." The magistrate left, unconvinced, warning that superstition breeds rebellion. Snow came early, fields froze, barns emptied. Yet Rowan's little patch stayed green under its blanket of straw. He shared quietly carrots slipped into cold hands, herbs for mothers with coughing children. He never took payment. "The soil gives," he'd say, "so should we." The people began to whisper that the land favored kindness. Some began tending their own secret gardens again, defying the steward's rules. At night, the valley twinkled faintly with hidden lamps, gardens reborn beneath the stars. When spring returned, inspectors came again, measuring and recording. They found less yield in the steward's neat fields than in the peasants' quiet corners. Numbers puzzled them. They returned to the city, muttering about unscientific abundance. Rowan just laughed softly and continued digging. He began teaching children the old rhyme, "Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil, till work is done." They repeated it like play, their bare feet stamping rhythm into the earth. Years flowed, the steward died, his ledgers forgotten. The new landlord, a weary knight returned from endless wars, cared little for taxes and much for peace. He walked the valley one misty morning, watching the peasants tend their gardens. He stopped beside Rowan, now middle-aged, and knelt to smell the earth. "It smells of home," the knight said quietly. "Teach me." And so the rhythm passed upward, from peasant to noble, from hand to armored hand. The knight began spreading the method across his lands. Mixed planting, composting, rest years for fields. Yields rose. Famine waned. He never claimed invention. "It's the peasants who know," he told the king's men, but courts seldom listen to humility. Soon scholars wrote treatises about the knight's new agrarian system, forgetting Rowan's name as easily as they had Aldous. Rowan aged gently, content that the gardens thrived, even if credit wandered. When his last spring came, he sat beneath the oak and pressed a handful of soil to his chest. "Remember for me," he whispered, "when I'm gone." That night he died in his sleep, smiling. In the morning, villagers found that every garden in the valley had sprouted tiny white flowers overnight, none anyone had planted. They called them Rowan's stars. Generations turned again. The valley survived plagues, wars, taxes. The oak finally fell in a storm, but its trunk became a boundary stone. Its roots nourished mushrooms that glowed faintly at dusk. The world beyond industrialized machines clattered. Smoke rosebud within the valley. People still knelt to sow by hand. They no longer spoke of magic, they spoke of care. Yet something lingered, a hum, a sense that the soil listened back. By the late 19th century, a railway line was planned to cut through the old gardens. Surveyors arrived, staking poles through plots that had fed families for centuries. One night, a storm washed half the stakes away, and the railway was quietly redirected. The villagers said the earth had chosen its own path. Whether accident or omen, no one argued. Among those who watched was a young schoolteacher named Clara Wells. She had studied science in the city, where soil was measured by chemistry, not love. But she had returned home to teach children who still brought wildflowers to class. One evening, while grading papers by lamplight, she noticed a child's drawing a crude picture of hands planting seeds, labeled "The soil remembers." The phrase echoed in her mind. She began researching the valley's odd fertility, tracing oral tales back through parish records. She found mention of Uan, Mara, even fragments of Alda's rhyme. Her heart quickened. "An unbroken line," she whispered, "of gardeners who never wrote history but became it." Clara spent 10 years compiling their story. Her manuscript, Whispers Beneath the Furrow, argued that medieval peasants possessed ecological knowledge far ahead of their time. Companion planting, soil renewal, biodiversity. Publishers laughed. "Too sentimental," they said. "Peasants don't innovate." The manuscript gathered dust until decades later, when environmental movements rediscovered her work. By then, Clara was gone, but her words became scripture for a new kind of gardener, those who sought harmony, not conquest. In the 20th century, the valley turned modestly modern. Tractors replaced oxen, electric lamps replaced candles, yet many still kept small plots by hand. Old habits survived, even under progress. One cold evening, an elderly farmer named Elsie dug up a patch for spring beans. Her spade struck metal. She knelt, brushing aside dirt, revealing a rusted tin box. Inside lay folded papers, brown with age, and a tiny clay amulet shaped like a leaf. The papers were written in an archaic script, but she could make out words: turn the root, face the sun. Tears stung her eyes. You're still here, she murmured to the darkness. She reburied the box, leaving only the amulet on her windowsill. From that night on, her garden bloomed earlier than anyone else's. As decades rolled into the digital age, the valley's name began appearing online in forums about ancestral gardening. Visitors, chemhistorians, botanists, dreamers, they took soil samples, drone photos, documentaries, yet none captured what locals felt when kneeling in the dirt, a quiet vibration beneath their palms, as if time itself still breathed there. A filmmaker once asked an old man, "What's your secret?" The man smiled, his voice rough as gravel. "No secret," he said, "just listening. Soil talks, you know? Not in words, more like forgiveness." Underneath his words lay something ancient, the echo of Alda thanking the earth for her harvest, Breda humming lullabies to her sprouts, Mara tracing moonlight on leaves, Ewan writing by candle, Rowan whispering to his patch of mint. The generations formed a single heartbeat stretching across centuries. Then, one spring dawn, the villagers awoke to find a circle of wildflowers blooming where the oak had once stood, different colors, shapes, even species, all intertwined. No one had sown them. They called the circle the garden's breath. Every year afterward, the flowers returned, changing patterns but never failing to appear. Children danced around them, reciting the rhyme that somehow still survived. Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil till work is done. Tourists came, took photos, left coins. Scientists puzzled over the soil's fertility, but the villagers just smiled and kept tending their gardens. For them, the miracle wasn't the flowers, it was the continuity, the simple proof that care outlives memory. When the oldest woman in the valley finally died, Elsie's great-granddaughter, they buried her under the circle of wildflowers. During the funeral, a soft rain fell, and sunlight pierced through clouds, scattering gold across every leaf. For a moment, everyone felt it, the hum beneath their feet, the pulse of countless hands that had loved the same earth. Years later, a child would dig in that very spot, planting a seed for a school project. He'd press it into the damp soil and whisper words he'd never been taught, words that rose unbidden from somewhere older than language. Thank you. The seed would sprout, reaching toward light, and beneath it, unseen, the roots would touch older roots, woven through centuries, carrying whispers forward. The soil would remember every hand, every heartbeat, every quiet act of faith that kept life turning. And so it continues. Even now, when machines, sow fields, and satellites map every furrow somewhere, a gardener still kneels, barefoot, feeling the cool pulse of the ground, murmuring a line passed down through 1,000 forgotten mouths. Turn the root, face the sun, thank the soil, till work is done. No monument marks Alda's name, no statue honors Ewan, no book records Mara or Rowan. Yet their legacy endures in every sprout that breaks the crust of spring, in every hand that plants with care instead of haste. History remembers kings in marble, but the earth remembers peasants in bloom. At twilight, when the valley exhales and the scent of damp herbs rises, the wind carries a song so faint it might be imagination. It drifts through gardens and over hedges, through fields and centuries, until it becomes part of the rhythm of breathing itself, the old song of soil and seed and gratitude, the song that never ends. And if, One quiet night, you find yourself unable to sleep and wander outside. Press your hand into the dirt. Feel its coolness, its patience. Listen closely. Beneath the silence, you might hear them, the gardeners of long ago still, whispering their endless promise. We tended so you could dream. Dawn drags its pale light across a ruined field. The air smells of iron and smoke, and your hands still tremble from the slaughter. Around you, soldiers move like ghosts, sharpening blades that no longer shine. A priest mutters over the dead, his prayers trembling as the flames consume another pile of bodies. You thought the fighting was done. It isn't. A horn blares through the fog orders to march. Armor scrapes, boots sink into the mud, and every step feels heavier than the last. The ridge ahead gleams faintly gold beneath the early sun, but beauty has no place here. Arrows scream overhead, blackening the sky. You raise your shield just in time. Shafts rattle against it like hail. Men fall before you can even shout their names. Then comes the charge. Shields lock, spears thrust, and the world becomes a storm of metal and mud. Someone crashes into you. Another collapses beside you with a broken cry. You don't think, swing, block, stumble, kill. The noise is deafening. Steel on bone, men choking in the muck. You slip, hit the ground, taste blood, and crawl until your fingers touch a fallen sword. When you rise again, the ridge is slick with bodies. Hours vanish. The rain begins, cold and merciless, washing red streams downhill. When the horns finally call retreat, you realize you've been deaf for minutes. You stand among strangers who look like corpses still breathing. Victory, the captain says, but it doesn't feel like winning. That night, fires flicker across the camp. The surgeon moves between men with a rusty knife and a bowl of wine. The screams come in waves. You stare into the flames until they blur into faces. Every gust of wind sounds like arrows returning. You close your eyes, but the battlefield follows. When dawn comes again, new orders wait. Another ridge, another charge. You tighten your armor, though your hands shake too much to tie the straps. The man beside you laughs, hollow. We're already ghosts, because once you've stood in that storm of blades, you understand no one lasts a minute on a medieval battlefield. Some die on the ground. The rest just keep walking long after they should have fallen. The first thing you notice isn't the swords. It's the smell. The battlefield stinks of sweat, mud, and blood baked under a pale sun. The air itself feels thick, clinging to your throat. And the buzzing of flies sounds almost louder than the distant roar of men shouting in formation. You've barely stepped out of the camp, and already your stomach twists. The ground under your boots squelches, not soft soil, but a mix of churned mud and something darker. That's when it hits you. This isn't a training yard. This is a slaughterhouse. The horn blows once, sharp and metallic, and every man around you stiffens. They move not like individuals, but like parts of a single creature, shields locking, pikes bracing, eyes forward. You try to steady your breath, but your heart's hammering loud enough to drown out the signal. To your left, a boy barely 17 vomits into the mud, wipes his mouth, and grips his spear again. No one laughs, no one even looks. You realize this is normal. The enemy forms across the field lines of steel and leather, shimmering in the morning haze. Flags ripple above them, colors of crimson and black. You can't tell how many they are. It doesn't matter. They're coming. The second horn sounds deeper this time, and every instinct you have screams to run. But the man in front of you, his face hidden behind a dented helmet, plants his feet. He doesn't flinch. You copy him, pretending you're not terrified. The ground starts trembling. At first, it's faint, like distant thunder. Then it grows an earthquake of hooves. The enemy cavalry is charging, and you finally understand why veterans always said death has a sound. It's the drumming of horses' hooves mixed with armor rattling and men screaming battle prayers. You lift your shield because everyone else does. You crouch lower. You try not to imagine what happens if you don't. Then impact. The world explodes. The first row of pikes splinters as horses crash into them. The noise is so violent your ears ring. A rider tumbles from his saddle, crushed beneath his own horse. Someone screams beside you, and when you glance over, he's gone just a space filled with blood spray and dust. Your arm burns where a spear haft slammed your shield. You barely manage to stay upright. The commander's voice rises above the chaos, a guttural roar, forward. You stumble ahead with the rest, feet slipping on corpses and wet grass. The line surges, shoving you toward the enemy infantry. Steel meets steel. The clang reverberates through your bones. The first time you strike, your blade catches on a man's helmet. The vibration numbs your hand. You pull back and swing again, wild and desperate. This time you hit flesh. The sword bites into someone's arm, and hot blood splashes across your wrist. You stare for a second, horrified that it's real, that you've actually cut someone open. There's no time to think. The man's still alive, still coming. He slams into you, both of you falling into the mud. His dagger flashes. You shove your shield between you, screaming, kicking, trying to push him away. Someone steps on your leg. You hear a sickening crunch that might be your knee. You don't feel pain yet, just pressure and panic. You thrust upward, blindly, the tip of your sword finding his throat. His weight collapses on top of you, heavy and limp. The smell hits next ear, sweat, death. You gag. When you finally push his body off, you realize how close you came to being one of the nameless. Around you, the line has broken into chaos. Men fight in clusters, slipping in mud, screaming for saints and mothers alike. You catch glimpses of faces, some grim, some terrified, all streaked with grime. There's no order now, just instinct and exhaustion. You see a knight on horseback, cutting through soldiers like they're wheat. His sword moves too fast to follow. You think he looks invincible, until a peasant with a pike stabs the horse, and both rider and beast crash to the ground. The knight tries to rise, his armor gleaming with blood. 3 men fall on him with axes, hacking until he stops moving. You want to look away, but you can't. This is what war is: no glory, no chivalry, just survival, measured in seconds. Someone grabs your shoulder, his face smeared with mud and blood. "Hold the line," he shouts, spitting out a tooth. You can't even tell if it's yours or his. You nod dumbly, raising your shield again. Your arm feels like lead, your fingers trembling from shock. The next blow glances off the rim, sending pain shooting up to your shoulder. You stumble, swing back, and miss. Your vision narrows, the edges of the world blur. Somewhere, a trumpet blares retreat, but no one moves. You don't even know which side it's for. The skies turned gray, and rain starts to fall. turning everything slick. You slip again, catch yourself, slip once more. The mud's so thick now that every step feels like dragging through tar. When the enemy finally withdraws, you can't tell who's won. You drop to your knees, gasping, surrounded by silence that feels wrong, broken only by groans and rain hitting metal. Your body shakes uncontrollably. You look down and realize your hands are still clenched around your sword, knuckles white, blade red. A crow lands nearby, pecking at something in the mud. You don't look too closely. You're afraid of what you'll see. The boy who vomited earlier lies a few feet away, eyes open, face peaceful now. You want to close them, but you're too weak to move. Somewhere in the distance, another horn blows, signaling regrouping. You know what that means tomorrow. It happens again. You thought battle would last an hour, maybe 2. You didn't realize that even surviving 1 minute here demands everything you are, your strength, your breath, your will to keep moving when your body's begging to stop. You understand now, there's no surviving a medieval battlefield untouched. Even if you live, something inside you doesn't. And as you stagger back toward camp, past the broken weapons and silent bodies, you hear the veterans talking quietly, as if the dead might wake. One of them glances at you and mutters, "You made it through the first day. Don't expect another." The rain keeps falling. The mud keeps swallowing footprints. The crows keep coming. And the sun sets over a field that no one will remember by name, but every survivor will remember by smell.